Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a long, thoughtful look at something that feels absolutely central to our faith, but is often treated as sort of a side issue.
hmm
We're talking about our responsibility to the created world, and to guide us, we're unpacking a really deep theological essay called Stewards of the Earth, a biblical perspective on humanity's role in creation.
It's such a crucial topic, and what I love about this essay is how it starts right at the bedrock. You open the first page of the Bible, and there it is. God places people in a world that is fundamentally His.
He's the owner.
He is the ultimate owner, yet He entrusts it to human care under His rule. And that's the great tension we have to hold. You see it right there in Genesis 1:28, the command to rule. And then in Psalm 24, that powerful reminder, the earth is the Lord's.
Right, and the fullness thereof, that tension is really where we have to start, isn't it? Divine ownership, but also this human mandate. It seems like holding those two things together stops us from making a couple of really big mistakes.
It does.
So if the earth is the Lord's, what exactly is our role? I mean, the essay calls it the stewardship mandate. Where do we find the clearest instruction for that?
I think the most concise definition comes in Genesis 2:15. This is where we see human purpose tied not just to being fruitful and multiplying, but to this idea of faithful tending. It's when Adam is placed in the Garden of Eden.
Okay.
God puts him there for a very specific reason, to work it and take care of it. And what's so important is that this happens before the fall. This is before sin enters the world.
So work and care are part of our design, part of our perfection, not a punishment.
Exactly. Not a consequence of our failure. It's integral to who we were made to be.
I want to pause on that phrase for a moment, to work it and take care of it. This is where that word dominion gets its proper, maybe gentler interpretation, right? What do those Hebrew verbs really get at?
They're just magnificent verbs. To work it comes from the Hebrew abad, and that often means to serve or to labor.
Yeah.
It's about cultivation, development, just fruitful activity. It's good, dignified work.
Okay, so abad is to serve or cultivate. What about the second part?
The second verb, to take care of it, is shamar, and that means to guard, to keep, or to protect. It's a watchful, protective role.
So you put them together.
You put them together, and you realize our primary purpose in the world isn't reckless use or just consuming things for ourselves. It's this careful, protective, fruitful tending of something that belongs to someone else. We're like, royal gardeners, accountable to the king.
Active service and watchful protection. I like that. It feels like the essay immediately sets up these guardrails to keep us from falling into the two most common ditches in this whole conversation. What are those two guardrails?
Well, the first guardrail fights against what you might call ownership pride, arrogant exploitation. It's remembering that the earth belongs to the Lord, not to us. We don't own it, absolutely.
We're trustees.
We are always trustees, never the absolute title holders. And that perspective should radically change our instincts. When we prioritize immediate profit at the expense of a river's health or a forest's future, we are forgetting we're just tenants. We're acting like we're the owners.
That speaks right to our human arrogance, doesn't it? But what about the other extreme, the one we see so often in culture today?
The second guardrail is against idolatry, or what some might call nature worship. The idea that the earth is not a god. It's not ours to worship, but it is a good gift from the Creator.
Romans 1 talks about that.
It does. Paul warns that this is the path where people exchange God's truth for a lie, and they start to worship the creature rather than the Creator. So if we elevate an ecosystem or an animal or the planet itself to the level of the divine, we're breaking the first commandment.
So that dual perspective is just. It's incredibly helpful. The Bible's path avoids both reckless exploitation on one side and nature worship on the other. It centers us on what then?
It centers us on responsible management. Management in God's name for His glory and for our neighbor's good. We're called to delight in creation, to see how good it is. But that delight should always point us back to the Creator. It's like we're called to magnify the artist by taking good care of his art.
And the essay is so clear that this isn't some optional side hobby for Christians. It's not an elective. It roots this entire calling in the Lordship of Christ. How does Christ's role as Creator really anchor this for us?
It's anchored in the massive cosmic scope of Christ's work. You see in Colossians 1, where it says, "For by Him all things were created through Him and for Him, and in Him all things hold together."
Thanks.
All things. If Christ is the creator and the sustainer of everything, then honoring him isn't just about our quiet times or our church attendance. It rules the sparrows and the stars.
Ah,
Every single atom is held together by his power. So our stewardship, it's inherently an act of worship. It's recognizing his total authority over all of reality.
and when we put Christ at the center like that, it forces us to completely reframe that difficult word, dominion. If the world is a trust from the Lord, then dominion can't mean domination. It has to be.
Service. That's the core understanding. The essay says dominion is not license, but service. We're called to use wisdom, justice, and mercy in all our daily actions that involve the world, how we manage fields, how we treat animals, even how we design our tools.
That's what Micah talked about, right? Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly.
Exactly. That ethical rule has to shape how we interact with the material world just as much as how we interact with our neighbor. Our rule should reflect God's rule, and his rule gives life. It sustains.
That gives us a really clear roadmap for this conversation. We've laid the foundation. Now, the essay takes us through the historical context, the biblical story, the theology, and then into practical application. So let's dig into that first section, the historical and cultural background. We need to understand what dominion meant when it was first spoken.
And that context is so important. It's not just a dusty detail. It's what helps us see how revolutionary Genesis 1 and 2 really were. Israel heard this creation mandate in a world that was just saturated with other stories about how the world began.
Okay, so when we look at the cultures surrounding Israel, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, what were their stories about creation, and how did the Genesis account stand out as so radically different?
Well, in the pagan world, creation stories were usually filled with chaos and conflict. You have these myths where the gods are fighting brutal battles, and creation is almost an afterthought. Sometimes it's made from the corpse of a defeated god.
Wow.
And crucially, in those stories, humanity was often created to be, well, drudges, slaves to feed the altars of the gods. The gods were needy, and they required constant service out of fear. And that kind of story, it just strips human work of any real dignity. The land has no purpose beyond serving these unstable gods.
So their relationship with the earth was rooted in fear or obligation to a whole pantheon of gods. The land wasn't a gift to be enjoyed, it was a resource to be fought over.
Precisely. And then you get Genesis 1 and 2, and the contrast is just stunning. It proclaims one living God who creates just by speaking. There's no struggle, no violence. He calls everything. He makes good. And then as the crown of creation, he puts humans in the world not as slaves, but as his representatives.
His image bearers.
His image bearers. He gives them a task that mirrors his own wise care. Humans weren't made to feed the gods. They were made to steward the world for God. And that gives work incredible dignity.
Which brings us to that core interpretation question. We have those powerful words in Genesis 1.28. Be fruitful and multiply and subdue it and have dominion. Those words subdue and dominion, they sound strong. They can even sound harsh, which is why they're sometimes used to justify exploitation.
This is such a critical point, and the essay addresses it by linking Genesis 1 directly to Genesis 2. The Hebrew word for subdue is kabash, and yes, it can mean to tread down or bring under control. Dominion or rata also means to rule. If we stop there, you could maybe make a case for ruthless exploitation.
But we don't stop there.
We don't. The Bible gives us the interpretive key just a few verses later.
In Genesis 2.15, where we shift from the big picture to the specific task in the garden.
Exactly. Genesis 2.15 shows us the manner in which that rule is supposed to be exercised. Adam's task is to serve and guard Shemaret. This is the kingly task, but it's translated into a pastoral, protective role.
So subduing is more about ordered tending. It's about bringing the wild potential of the world into fruitful cultivation.
Yes, think of it like the work of a shepherd or a faithful manager, not a plunderer. If you think about ancient farming, it required subduing. You had to clear rocks, dig irrigation channels, master the raw land, but you did that for the purpose of long-term serving and guarding the soil. If you only subdue without guarding, the land is ruined in a generation.
So the biblical mandate is to manage the wildness of creation to create a sustainable, flourishing environment, one where human needs are met, but not at the cost of the land's ability to sustain future life.
That's it. And the law of Moses then wove this whole concept of tenancy and protection right into the fabric of Israel's daily life.
Tell us more about that idea of tenancy. What did it mean for Israel to live as tenants on the land?
It meant they never really had absolute ownership. The structure of the law itself constantly reinforced this truth that the land belongs to the Lord. They were guests. And that's a critical safeguard against entitlement or abuse.
Hmm.
A tenant treats a property differently than an owner, right? You have to maintain it for the true owner's return.
And the laws about rest and justice seem designed to really enforce that principle, to make sure that the human drive for profit didn't destroy the land or the poor.
These laws were really incredible. I mean, there was socio-ecological mechanisms. We all know about the Sabbath day, but there was also the Sabbath year. Every seventh year, they had to let their fields lie fallow.
Which would have been essential for resting the soil, letting it recover. A mandatory environmental reset.
Yes. But it was also an act of incredible faith. Think about giving up a whole year of productivity.
It's a profound act of trust and a powerful curb on greed.
It was. And then you had the Jubilee year every 50 years, which reset the entire economy. Land went back to its original family. This was a structural way to prevent permanent wealth inequality and to guard creation from being destroyed by short-term greed.
So God's rule loves justice, and the health of the land and justice for the poor are tied together. You can't have one without the other.
You can't. The land's health was inseparable from the community's justice. If you violate the principle of rest, you harm the soil. If you violate the principle of Jubilee, you create permanent poverty. Both were a violation of God's design.
I want to go back to that detail from the source material about the rules for war. In Deuteronomy, Israel is told not to cut down fruit trees when they're laying siege to an enemy city. In an war, survival is everything. Why would God command that kind of restraint?
That is one of the most compelling examples of restraint in the entire Old Testament. I mean, think about the temptation. A siege needs a ton of wood for ramps and towers. A fruit tree is right there. It's strong wood. But the command is clear. You shall not cut them down, for the tree of the field is man's life.
That implies a long-term perspective that overrides even immediate military necessity.
It absolutely does. This seemingly small rule taught a huge moral lesson. Utility does not erase goodness, and future generations matter. Even in the most extreme situation, you cannot destroy the basis of future life. That fruit tree has a value that extends beyond the immediate need because it's a gift from God intended to sustain life.
That sets such a high standard. If this was all embedded in the law, what did the prophets have to say when the people inevitably failed?
The prophets made the connection unavoidable. They taught this reciprocal relationship. If you're faithful to the covenant, you get blessing. If you fail, you get devastation, not just for the people, but for the land itself.
They used that vivid language. The land mourns.
Yes, incredible language. The land mourns under bloodshed and lies. It shows us that sin scars more than souls. When humanity misrepresents God through injustice and greed, it bruises the very world we were meant to tend. Injustice isn't just a spiritual problem. It has real environmental consequences like famine and drought.
And on the flip side, the hope of restoration always seems to include creation healing alongside the people.
That's right. The prophets' visions of restoration were so physical. Deserts would bloom, fields would sing, the wolf would lie down with the lamb. These images aren't just pretty poetry. The essay calls them previews of real renewal that flow from the king's justice. When God's righteous reign is established, creation itself rejoices.
That historical context is so critical for the rest of the biblical story, which we're going to trace now, from the garden all the way to the final city. It helps us see that stewardship is woven into the entire drama of salvation.
Exactly. The grand narrative starts in a tended Garden Eden, and it ends in a glorious city garden, the New Jerusalem. The road between them is the story of our stewardship calling.
Let's start with that beautiful truth that work was given before the fall. It's so often forgotten that work is part of paradise.
It's fundamental. The very first task given to humanity was to tend the land and name the creatures. This wasn't a burden. It was a privilege. It was part of being human at our best. It reminds us that fruitful, cultivating work is part of our created identity. It's honorable. It's purposeful.
But then, of course, the fall happens, the curse comes, and everything is disrupted. The calling isn't erased, but it changes. How did the curse make the task so much harder?
Well, the curse brought thorns and thistles, sweat and death. The ground itself now resists human effort. So the stewardship task became immensely harder. It introduced frustration and futility into everything. It didn't revoke the mandate to work, but it turned it into a constant struggle. Stewardship became not just cultivation, but redemptive cultivation.
And right after the fall, we see how the misuse of power begins. Cain's story is this rapid descent into violence.
Cain's story is a profound example of how internal spiritual failure plays out ecologically and socially. Cain is a tiller of the soil. He murders his brother Abel. And the immediate consequence is that the ground itself cries out. God tells Cain, "The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground."
So the misuse of power over your neighbor has immediate, tangible consequences for the land.
Precisely. The root failure is in the heart. God warns Cain that sin is crouching at the door. Cain's envy and violence spoil his relationship with God, with his brother, and with the earth. His failure to master his heart leads to total destruction.
After that, the flood comes as a judgment. But even in judgment, God shows this commitment to his creation. Which brings us to the Noahic covenant.
Yes, the Noahic covenant is a critical turning point. God makes an everlasting covenant not just with Noah, but specifically with every living creature that is with you. The rainbow is God's pledge of care. It wraps the human and non-human world together under his mercy. It guarantees the stability of the seasons, which is what makes continued stewardship possible.
And as salvation history moved forward, this relationship with the earth stays front and center. God locates his promises in actual physical places.
Absolutely. The covenant with Abraham was about a specific piece of earth, the promised land. Salvation history happens in real fields, rivers, and mountains. This shows us that God values the physical world. Redemption isn't about escaping the physical, but about its ultimate transformation.
So back in the law, we see these detailed compassion laws that tie love of neighbor directly to love of place. What are some of the most striking examples of that?
The laws in the Torah are remarkable. Take the laws about gleaning. Farmers had to leave the edges of their fields unharvested.
For the poor and the stranger, it ensures they have a way to get food without begging.
Exactly. It tied agriculture directly to social justice. A farmer couldn't maximize his profit because the Lord claimed a portion for the vulnerable. You also have laws about resting your animals, not muzzling an ox while it works. It's this consistent pattern of compassion that ensures economic activity is never separated from mercy.
So stewardship isn't just resource management, it's applied theology. It mandates ethical treatment for the vulnerable human or animal. And the wisdom literature, like Psalms and Proverbs, seems to take this a step further.
The wisdom literature trains our minds to engage with the world with gratitude and restraint. The wise person understands that creation itself speaks of God's glory, so wisdom learns from creation. Proverbs tells us to look at the ant or the eagle.
And learning from the natural world seems to produce a kind of piety, a restraint.
It does. The wise person sees rain and harvest as gifts, not entitlements, and that fosters gratitude. And gratitude produces restraint. Proverbs says the righteous person knows the needs of his animal. He's attentive. He refuses gain that ruins his land. Stewardship and character grow together.
That sets the stage perfectly for Christ, the center of the story. Jesus is both Lord and servant. How does he show his authority over creation, and how does he teach us about our accountability as stewards?
Well, Jesus actively demonstrates his authority. When he stills the storm with a word, the disciples ask, "Who is this?" that even the wind and the sea obey him.
Right.
When he multiplies the bread and fish, he shows his dominion reaches seas and soil. And critically, that his compassion feeds both bodies and souls. He's the creator, present and concerned with both spiritual and material needs.
And his parables so often use images of land and resource management.
They do. Think about the parable of the talents, or the parable of the tenants of the vineyard. They are all about owners who entrust property to managers, and then they return to settle accounts. They reward faithfulness. This framework teaches radical accountability. What we have, our money, our time, our resources, is a trust from the ultimate owner, and he will return.
Let's also think about the parable of the sower. It's about the heart, but it's fundamentally about the land. The success of the seed depends entirely on the quality of the soil.
That's a subtle but crucial connection. It uses the reality of farming, the need to prepare the ground, to illustrate a spiritual truth. It confirms that the physical world is a potent metaphor for spiritual receptivity. It ties the farmer's effort and the environment's quality directly to the idea of fruitfulness.
And then when we get to the apostolic teaching, we see Christ's lordship over creation really spelled out, but we also get this poignant concept of creation groaning. That passage in Romans 8 can be confusing.
It's where the New Testament explicitly deals with the ecological consequences of the fall. Paul preaches Christ as creator and sustainer, but he also teaches that creation groans under the weight of human sin, waiting for the liberty of the children of God. Creation itself is suffering because humanity, its intended steward, failed.
I often hear people use that passage to say, well, if God's just going to burn it all up and make a new world anyway, why should I bother with recycling? You know, that shrug and wait mentality.
We respond by clarifying the nature of the groaning and the renewal. Creation's future is tied directly to humanity's redemption. It's waiting. That shrug and wait idea misunderstands the biblical hope. Creation isn't waiting for annihilation, it's waiting for liberation. Our faithful labor now is aligned with God's purposes in the meantime.
That brings us to the end of the narrative, the final hope. If creation is groaning, the story can't end in ashes. What's the final vision that anchors our work now?
The story closes with the magnificent promise of the new heavens and new earth where righteousness dwells. The earth doesn't end. It's purified and renewed. The final image in Revelation isn't some cloudy spiritual heaven, but a glorious city that descends to a renewed earth.
The New Jerusalem, which is described as a city garden.
Exactly. The ultimate convergence of human culture and natural flourishing. You have the river of life, the tree of life for the healing of the nations. This anchors our present work in a coming tangible renewal. Faithful caretaking now is an act of hope. We're working under the Lord who says, "Behold, I am making everything new."
That vision provides the ultimate theological meaning for our work today, which leads us right into the next section, tying our actions back to our core identity as image bearers and the power of the gospel.
This is where it all comes together. Stewardship is rooted fundamentally in being made in God's image. If we lose that, we lose the motivation for any of this.
So when we say our dominion should reflect God's image, what does that mean practically? What part of God's character are we supposed to reflect in how we treat the earth?
It means we're called to represent God's character, not our own self-interest. And God's character is defined by wise rule, truthful speech, and this is critical, merciful care. As the Psalm says, "The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made."
So our dominion can't be domination.
It has to be ordered service that reflects the Creator's goodness. His rule gives life. It sustains. It doesn't grind things down. When we steward, we have to mirror that life-giving, merciful rule.
The essay talks about two forms of image abuse. Can you clarify those for us?
Image abuse happens in two opposite ways. First, when we exploit people or places through pollution, greed, violence, we are denying this image. We are misrepresenting God's character as a merciful ruler. The act of exploitation is an assault on the image we're supposed to bear.
And the second form of abuse is confusing the creator with the creation.
Correct. When we kneel to creation, when we worship the earth itself, that's also image abuse because it exchanges God's truth for a lie. It leads straight to idolatry. We are designed to rule for God, to serve him, not to worship what God made. Both exploitation and worship are failures to understand our representative role.
And the gospel reframes all of this, doesn't it? It moves us beyond just duty. How does Christ's work on the cross apply to creation care?
The scope of Christ's redemption is cosmic. Paul says Christ died to reconcile all things to God, whether things on earth or things in heaven. So creation care is explicitly inside the scope of his redemptive purpose. The curse that started in Genesis 3 is being undone by the cross, and his resurrection begins the new creation.
This brings us back to that crucial balance. If Christ is making all things new, and the planet's fate is secure in him, what's our motivation to work so hard now? How do we avoid that paralysis?
We navigate this by understanding that we work in hope, not to achieve hope. We can't save the planet with our own hands, but we also can't just shrug and wait. The truth is that our labor in the Lord is not in vain. It echoes his purposes. It will be caught up in his final renewal. Our work, however small, is meaningful because it's done under the King who guarantees the final outcome.
And the practical means for doing this is through the power of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely. When a person is converted, the Spirit's fruit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, all of that changes how we manage the world. It turns harsh hands gentle. It turns greedy hearts generous. And this spiritual transformation applies to every sphere of life. A gentle heart stewards gently. A greedy heart exploits.
Now, this next part requires some careful theological clarity. The essay makes a distinction between Israel's stewardship mandate, which was tied to a specific land, and the church's global calling. Why is it so important to keep those two things distinct?
This clarity is essential if we're going to read Scripture correctly. It's tempting for us as the church because we want to see all those beautiful prophetic promises of peace and abundance realized right now in our own nation. But we have to keep God's storyline straight.
So what was unique about Israel's covenant with the land?
Israel's stewardship was uniquely tied to covenanted promises of blessing and curse related to their specific physical soil, the land promised to Abraham. Their peace and prosperity depended on their faithfulness in managing that specific geographical location. And God will keep those promises when a restored people dwell under the Messiah's reign. Their relationship with that particular piece of land is unique.
And the church is different. We're a global body, not tied to a single territory.
That's right. The church's stewardship is not tied to a national land grant. It's a spirit-formed calling among all nations. Our mandate is to honor Christ in every sphere, including creation, while we wait for the King. We inherit the principles of wisdom and justice from the law, but not the specific promises about the soil of the Middle East.
So, understanding that distinction helps us apply the law rightly today. We appreciate the principles, but we don't confuse our global role with Israel's unique covenant position.
Exactly. It prevents us from spiritualizing Israel's future or materializing the church's calling. We long for that prophetic future when the King reigns and the earth is perfectly healed, but our job now is to apply Christ-centered justice and care wherever we happen to be planted.
This leads perfectly to the final point of this section, the nature of the promised renewal. It's described as both earthy and holy. The hope is tangible.
The future hope is entirely tangible. God's rule transforms hearts and habitats. The prophets picture ultimate shalom, wolves and lambs at peace, children safe in the fields, amazing abundance. The groaning ends when the sons and daughters of God are revealed, and the curse's thorns are replaced by fruitful joy.
So stewardship today is really a signpost, pointing to the day when God's will is finally done on earth as it is in heaven. That theological clarity has to translate into practical daily actions.
If the earth belongs to the Lord, then the very first application that has to reshape our lives is humility. Spiritual humility and radical accountability.
So how does acknowledging that we are trustees, not owners, change our daily approach to things? Because in our society, the temptation is always to consume and assume our ownership is absolute.
It starts with a constant realization that we are trustees who have to give an account. This posture urges us to plan with care, to resist waste, to use resources with gratitude and restraint. A greedy heart sees a forest as timber. A faithful steward sees a system to be managed and preserved. It means we think long-term, beyond our own lifetime.
It's a total reframing of how we see the world around us, not as props for our comfort, but as gifts to be guarded.
Absolutely. We move from seeing people and places as props for our comfort to seeing them as gifts to be guarded and served for God's sake. It shifts us from consumerism to conservation that's rooted in reverence for the Creator.
And that simple prayer, "Give us today our daily bread," seems to reinforce this. It keeps us humble.
That prayer is a profound act of theological stewardship. It teaches us to receive daily provision, trusting God for the moment rather than hoarding, and crucially, it teaches us to share that provision because we know the giver delights in generous hands. It makes us pause and ask, is this use necessary? Is it shared? Is it sustainable?
The second application connects that humility directly to loving our neighbor in our place, echoing those compassion laws we talked about.
Yes, the Old Testament laws, leaving gleanings, resting animals, they tied fieldwork directly to human need and mercy. The modern echoes of that are profound. Stewardship today requires caring for the poor by guarding their access to clean water, ensuring clean air in their communities, and designing work that honors people rather than grinding them down.
So stewardship isn't just about big, abstract policy debates. It's about small acts of obedience right where we are. It connects our faith to mending a fence.
That's where faithfulness lives, in the tangible local acts. Jesus calls us to let our light shine in good works, and that includes how we treat the piece of earth and the circle of life within our reach. To plant a tree, repair a fence, pay a fair wage, or teach a child to cherish creatures is not sentimental. It is obedience rooted in the goodness of God.
The third application is about the church's role in bearing witness and maintaining balance in a culture that seems to swing between those two extremes of exploitation and worship.
The global church has a unique witness by resisting both errors at the same time. We resist worshiping the creation, which is idolatry, and we resist despising it as just fuel for our desires. We choose gratitude and proper use. Scripture teaches that nothing God created is to be rejected if it's received with thanksgiving and used in holiness, which implies wise, careful use.
And it's this balance that frees us for courageous action without falling into either rage or despair.
Absolutely. This balance lets us act with courage when creation suffers from human sin, greed, pollution, violence, without becoming paralyzed by rage or despair. Because our ultimate hope rests in the Lord who renews all things. We're not burdened with saving the world, but with serving the Creator.
And finally, stewardship functions as a kind of hope training, preparing us for the future and training the next generation in patience.
Creation's ongoing groans constantly remind us that our best efforts can't fully turn back the curse. No amount of recycling is going to usher in the kingdom. But this groaning doesn't lead to cynicism. It stirs us to work and pray as people who know how the story ends. We teach our children to plant gardens and read scripture, to watch birds and watch their words, so the grace that saves their souls also shapes their hands for patient care.
And when the storms come, whether literal storms or figurative ones, this posture teaches us where our ultimate trust lies.
We learn to trust the one whom the winds and waves obey Christ. Our practical care, even in suffering, is a demonstration of our faith in the one who will bring final, permanent renewal. We just keep serving our neighbors and caring for the resources around us until the King returns.
This has been a profoundly clarifying deep dive. Stewardship, far from being a footnote, is right there in the first command to humanity, and it's woven into the final vision of Revelation.
And to synthesize the whole thing, you really see three strong currents flowing through all of Scripture. Stewardship springs from God's ownership, which compels our worship. It springs from our image-bearing role, which compels our justice. And it springs from Christ's lordship, which anchors our hope.
And that final vision provides the right context for all our work now. The earth isn't just a temporary stage to be burned up, but a gift to be tended in hope, waiting for its renewal.
That's the ultimate takeaway. The Creator who walked in a garden will dwell with his people forever in a renewed world where righteousness feels at home. Until that day, we work and we wait. Hands busy, hearts lifted, giving thanks for the rain and the soil and breath, and giving glory to the Lord to whom every field and forest belongs.
As we close, let's return to that powerful passage that really summarizes our whole discussion, Romans 8:19-21.
This passage ties our human future directly to the world's future. It's a profound encouragement for every single act of faithful stewardship. Paul writes, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God."
That is a staggering truth. Our hope, our final glory, is tied up with the world's hope and its final liberation.
It is. The encouragement here is that creation's frustration is temporary. The curse is not the last word. Its liberation is guaranteed when God's children receive their final glory. Our faithful actions today, those small, humble acts of obedience and restraint, they are woven into this great, inevitable, hopeful future. May you be strengthened to steward the peace of the world entrusted to you today, whether it is your garden, your office, your neighborhood, or your resources, knowing that your labor in the Lord is a down payment on a future when all things are made new. Go in peace.